On this episode of the All-American Legacy Podcast.
And it turned out that Anzio was one of the bloodiest battles of World War II. We had over 30,000 casualties dead, and the Germans as many. So here's an area not more than 15 miles that we fought back and forth for control. Is literally saturated with blood of young men.
This is the 82nd Airborne Division, fearless among fighting units.
From Fort Bragg, home of the Airborne and the center of the military universe, this is the All-American Legacy Podcast. An inside look at the 100-year history of the 82nd.
They are all American, all the way.
What does the term devil in baggy pants mean to you?
The devil in baggy pants? I have no idea.
What does the term devil in baggy pants mean to you?
Striking the fear in our enemies.
What does the term devil in baggy pants mean to you? The devil in baggy pants. When you hear the devil in baggy pants, what does that mean to you? What comes to your mind?
What battalion is that?
What?
Can't remember which battalion that is.
Is it a battalion?
Yeah.
Maybe an overall statement?
Why are you interviewing me?
What does the term devil in baggy pants mean to you?
1st Brigade, Delta Company 2504, 96, October 97 to 2008. I'm a devil in baggy pants.
Do you know where it came from?
Yes, I'm a German officer at Anzio beachhead.
Fair enough. Anything more?
What else do you want to know? What's the 1st Brigade?
Right.
It's one of the most well-known nicknames in the history of the 82nd Airborne Division, the Devil in Baggy Pants. There are books by that title. It's on the side of buildings, on our walls, and on murals here at Fort Bragg. One of our brigades, 1st Brigade, is named after the expression, the Devil Brigade. If you don't know, it dates back to the early months of 1944. In January of 1944, 82nd Airborne Division paratroopers, who are identifiable by their baggy pants, were fighting fiercely with Germans for the beachhead at Anzio, Italy. After the fighting, the diary of a German officer with the following passage was found.
American parachutists, the devils in baggy pants, are less than 100 meters from my outpost line. I can't sleep at night. They pop up from nowhere, and we never know how they will strike next. It seems like the black-hearted devils are everywhere.
Fighting against the Germans at Anzio were members of the 82nd's 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment. The nickname Devils in Baggy Pants stuck, and today our 1st Brigade, which holds the 504th Regimental lineage, carries that same spirit. So let's set the table here. What were our paratroopers doing there? In September 1943, General Mark Clark, the commander of the U.S. Fifth Army, one of the principal U.S. formations in Europe in World War II, requested Major General Ridgway, the commander of the 82nd, send the All-Americans to parachute onto the Salerno beachhead to help secure the Italian foothold established by the Allies. This was called Operation Avalanche, and it consisted of night jumps. Our boys accomplished the mission, and the division entered Naples and eliminated any doubt the Allies would be pushed back into the sea. After the successful conclusion of Operation Avalanche, the division was concentrated in Naples with a respite from fighting. On October 10th, Colonel Jim Gavin, commander of the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment, learned that he was promoted to general and would now become the 82nd's assistant division commander. At just 36, he was the Army's youngest general officer. Then on the 18th and 19th of November 1943, the division set sail for Britain, where they would prepare for the now famous cross-channel assault on D-Day. But one command team from the 82nd would remain in the Italian theater. Colonel Reuben Tucker's 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment would continue to fight in the Italian mountains. The 504th would remain in Italy to participate in Operation Shingle, a seaborne assault that would give the Allies a further foothold on the Italian peninsula. Operation Shingle would allow the Allies to capture Rome. The Allies felt that the capture of Rome might actually eliminate the need to make the cross-channel landings in France. Unfortunately, Anzio would be a time-consuming, casualty-heavy fight that ground down the Allies there. Mr. John Arson, director of the 82nd Airborne Division War Museum on Fort Bragg, explains the historical context of Anzio.
As you look at the Anzio operation, they start planning this operation. It's a combined British operation and American operation just south of Rome. Well, as they start to plan it, they start to set up the drop zone. They were looking at a parachute drop zone north of Anzio, about 10 miles along a road that comes from Anzio to the suburbs of Rome called the Albino area. And what's unique is that drop zone is along this road. There's several key bridges and overpasses. as well as a rail line. So it's very critical to control that. It's a main line of approach, line of communication. But when you look at the landing zone, it's a wide open area. And so as they're planning the operation, there's almost very little cover anywhere in this area. But then everyone has the same fears that they had with Sicily, and that's the friendly fire incidents. So what happens is the airborne operations plan, but then everybody pretty much comes up and says they have concerns about friendly fire. It's decided to take that airborne mission, those airborne units, primarily for this one, the 504, and use them in an amphibious assault into the actual city of Anzio.
Our airborne troops became amphibious assault troops. Lieutenant Colonel James Megellas, the most decorated officer in 82nd Airborne Division history, was a platoon leader in the 504th at Anzio. Here he explains the reaction of his paratroopers when they learned of their mission.
But I found out that once you were an elite unit, and the 82nd became an elite unit, as there are now elite units, you do whatever it is to further your cause. And if it requires you making a shore landing at Anzio instead of jumping, that's what you do.
So our men had their mission. They would execute violently. And that really is the spirit of the Devils in Baggy Pants. So on January 22nd, 1944, our men swarmed ashore on a 15-mile stretch of Italian beach. The landings were carried out so flawlessly and German resistance was so light that our paratroopers moved ashore with ease. It was sunny and war was relatively quiet. For our paratroopers, who had experienced fierce fighting in Sicily, it was hard to believe that a war was going on at all. The location of the Allied landing surprised local German commanders, who had been assured by their superiors that an amphibious assault would not take place during January or February. So when the landing occurred, the Germans were unprepared to react offensively. Within a week, however, the Germans gathered their troops in an attempt to push the Allies back. What followed was some of the most savage fighting of World War II.
And once again, they were facing their same German units, and that was the Airborne Division. The same unit that had fought in Sicily. They were fighting the remnants of that division here in this battle.
The men of the 505th faced the Krupp's K5, otherwise known as Anzio Annie, a heavy railway gun used by the Germans.
So this same road that the 504 was to be put on, that's one of the roads, along with the railroad tracks that are right next to that road, it is used to move Anzio Annie in and around that theater of operation.
By this time, the paratroopers of the 504th were battle-hardened, having just fought in the mountains of Salerno, but they were also exhausted from the experience. Some of our all-American legends were born out of the brutal crucible of Anzio. Men like Megellas stepped up and led. Here's his recollection of that fighting.
And it turned out that Anzio was one of the bloodiest battles of World War II. We had over 30,000 casualties dead, and the Germans as many. So here's an area not more than 15 miles that we fought back and forth for control. Is literally saturated with blood of young men.
By February of 1944, the Devils were isolated, alone on a large hill mass in the southern part of Anzio. They held in place and continued to fight off their German counterattackers. Megellas has a harrowing recollection from Anzio. Here in an interview with the Pritzker Military Museum and Library in Chicago, he tells the story of his efforts, along with his buddy Lieutenant Richard Riviere, nicknamed Rivers, to recover the body of one of their own, Sergeant Radica.
And we started up from this road bank and started up a knoll and started up. When we got up to the top of it, across this road, a German machine gun was dug in. And he could see us coming, our silhouetted forms, and they opened fire on us with this machine gun, and we immediately hit the ground. I was leading the patrol, as was always the case. When my platoon was on patrol, I led. Why? Because I was the oldest, I was the most experienced, I was best able to lead from the front. You lead from the front, but you command from the rear. Amen. I was leading this patrol, and they opened up on us. And then I gave the yelled back, turn around and go back down this knoll behind this roadbed where we would have cover. And so I was being the lead man. I was then bringing up the rear when it turned around. And the guy who had been bringing up before was my platoon sergeant, Sergeant Radica. And he was bringing it up. And as I was crawling on flat on the ground with my hands and crawling, all of a sudden I came up next to his body. And he was lying there prostrate, and he was in a crawling position. And I shook him at first and said, Radica, that's machine gun fire. Well, I didn't need to tell him that. But it's machine gun fire. And then I noted that the whole left side that was facing the machine gun was all ripped open. And there was nothing anybody could do for him. So we went back down, and we beat off a German attack that night. And the next day, we were dug in, waiting for next attack. We were completely surrounded, had no contact with anybody. Running short on ammunition, very few men, the whole business. Rivers and I would look up, and we were the only 2 officers left in this company of 8 that went in originally. We were just 2 of us. And we'd look up there, and here was the body of our platoon sergeant. Well, he's one of your family. I mean, it's a relationship, but like I said, it's close. And he's up there. Well, he was dead, obviously. Could have left him there to the elements or the enemy or whatever. But we would never do that. We would retrieve our guys. If they were wounded, we brought them back. If they were dead, we brought back their bodies at the risk of our own lives. But that's the kind of relationship that continues even after death. So we looked at that. And it agonized us. At the time I looked up here, it was his body. We couldn't go up and do anything about it because, well, we had exposed ourselves. But after it got dark, Rivers and I, the only 2 officers, not mind you, violated every teaching of the Army Infantry School, only 2 officers in the company. Instead of sending a couple of privates, we go up there, we crawl up this thing, up this hill. He gets on one side of Verdika's body, and I get on the other side, and he was wearing a harness like we wear. And we each get a hold of the harness, and we drag him face down and bring him back behind our position, a dead body. I write about this, and maybe the significance of it isn't fully understood. But it's a kind of relationship that I referred about earlier. The guy is dead. So what? He's dead. You can't do anything for him. What? The fact is that he's dead. His family back home, he'd be carried missing in action. We had no body. His family would never know what happened to him. If there was any insurance involved, that wouldn't be the case. Maybe the elements would eventually deteriorate the body, or the enemy would do something, or they'd dig him or whatever. But he would not die the kind of death that a combat soldier should experience. So we would retrieve these guys for those reasons, even at the risk of our own life. In this case, the risk of the only 2 officers left in that whole company holding off this German attack at the beachhead.
Another All-American legend, T. Moffatt Burris, who fought at Anzio, would go on to write the definitive history of the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment, a book titled Strike and Hold. Here, he talks to the All-American Legacy podcast about the fighting there.
We were in Naples, Italy. Had been assigned a mission of securing a beachhead at Anzio. At that time, I was a company commander of headquarters company, 3rd Battalion. Had 129 men, and after 1 week of fighting, I had 13 men left. So that's just a sample of what we went through on the Anzio beachhead. You know, paratroopers fighting Tiger tanks is not a comfortable feeling. And there was a question in our mind as our ranks depleted whether we were going to be able to hold out. But we did. And we stopped them and backed them up. And we held on while the British took off, and this was the first presidential unit citation that was given to the 82nd Airborne.
Another 504th legend, Roy Hanna, turned 100 this year. As a first lieutenant in the 504th, he was a platoon leader at Anzio. During the fighting, he was shot in the chest by a German machine gunner. Despite the wound, he continued leading his platoon. Here's his story.
I saw a machine gun nest back through the hedgerow, way out the hedgerow, and through some stupid thought on my point, I thought while the men were circling around this house and taking the wood on the other side, I'd run out the hedgerow and knock out this machine gun. This is stupid. I had no business doing this. So I'm running out all by myself out this hedgerow, and as I run out the hedgerow, a rabbit ran across in front of me, which was caused me to pivot. Just as I pivoted, I got shot right through the chest. I give that rabbit a credit for saving my life. Anyway, after I was immediately shot. And if you want to know what it felt like being shot at, it just didn't knock me down or anything. I pivoted around, went back to the house, found a spot of blood in my chest, and could reach in the back and find a little spot of blood back there. So I thought, this isn't too bad. So from there on, I led it. I guess I led the troops, or the sergeant led the troops, but I got credit for it. I'll tell you about it. I thought I died. I'll tell you. They just put me on the black. I could feel my back on the ambulance, and my body was leaving me. I could see my body getting smaller and smaller, and I thought, I must be dying. I thought, this isn't too bad. I wouldn't feel that way today.
For his actions at Anzio, Roy Hanna would be awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest honor that can be awarded to a member of the United States Army. The paratroopers of the 504th fought valiantly for 2 months, beating back German counterattackers until relieved. Keith Nightingale, a retired colonel and all-American paratrooper who now gives battlefield tours of the division, explains that.
On the 23rd of March, they were withdrawn. This is the 504th. And on the 22nd of April, they finally landed in the UK, which was too late to join the rest of the division for the Normandy invasion.
Anzio was a costly, grinding battle for both sides. By the end, our paratroopers were as exhausted as the enemy. It was not exactly a clear Allied success, but by fighting on for months, the 504th kept thousands of Germans contained in Italy for months. The Devils would miss D-Day and Normandy, but they had left their mark on the world, and would do so again later in the war. But the spirit of the black-hearted Devils has always remained in the 82nd. We spoke with Command Sergeant Major Vince Myers about the legacy of his forefathers in the Devil Regiment. Vince was the regimental command sergeant major of the 504th from 1995 to 1997. He is an all-American paratrooper for life and truly lives the Devil spirit.
Well, the most important thing to look there, those were paratroopers from 3rd Battalion that were actually doing amphibious landing. So they got 2 arrowheads, not only for the jumps that they did, the 4 jumps, but they also got an arrowhead for an amphibious landing, which is unique in the history of paratroopers. I think if you look at all the commanders that have been there, it's a premier regiment. If you look at General Steele, Shelton, Petraeus, Abizade, all those guys were commanders there. And so they take the best and they put there, and the best builds on the best. Well, I think the regiment and the 504th Association and the veterans are what make it better than most. Because that esprit de corps of taking guys that were at Anzio, in Panama, in the desert, in Afghanistan, Iraq, we build on that each and every time with the newest soldier that comes in. And like the 75th Rangers, 504, and certain other elements, you have an esprit de corps that you don't have anywhere else because of the families, the veterans, and especially our Gold Star families.
The final word on the spirit of the Devils goes to James Megellas.
Now, when you go to paratroopers and you're in 82nd, one of the things that brings you there is the fact the 82nd was the first airborne unit to be formed, and then they were the first American division on enemy soil, and that they have compiled a record of combat through the entire war. They have set the standards for leadership and set the standards for everything else. If you're going to get in service and you want to be with an outfit that has accomplished something and you can take pride in it, you're going to look at the 82nd. Now, you can take a look at a lot of others, but you can't say the same thing about a lot of other units that they do about the 82nd. If you're a guy and you have that feeling and you have that esprit and that desire to accomplish something, and you want to be associated with a unit that has done something, take a look at the 82nd, because they've got a record unequaled in terms of history, in terms of accomplishments, and everything else.
So that's the story of the Devils. We'll transition now to another bit of all-American history. Here's Lieutenant Colonel Joe Bacino with what might be a contentious segment. In the next piece, Joe references the 1962 film The Longest Day, starring John Wayne.
This is the cricket clicker. The cricket is a cheap metallic device. It looks like a child's toy. You press it together with your thumb and index finger to make this sound. It's sometimes referred to as a signaling cricket or a clicker-clacker. The cricket was used as a signaling device by paratroopers on the ground in World War II. It was used to communicate with fellow paratroopers in the dark, to avoid confusing an American paratrooper with a German combatant, and to avoid friendly fire. The cricket was used by the 101st Airborne Division as portrayed in the show Band of Brothers. But before that show, the cricket was first made famous by John Wayne, who plays the 82nd Airborne Division's Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin Vandervoort, commander of a battalion who spearheaded the D-Day invasion of Normandy.
Crickets have been distributed, sir. So I heard. At ease. Well, you're as ready as we can make you. This 5-cent toy, it wasn't issued to you for laughs. It may save your life. You're going to be landing in the dark. And on the other side of that hedgerow, a fellow may not be wearing the same uniform you are. So, 1 click is to be answered by 2 clicks. And if you don't get that answering click, hit the dirt and open fire. I repeat, 1 click must be answered by 2 clicks.
This idea of Vandervoort issuing crickets comes from the 1959 book by Cornelius Ryan, also titled The Longest Day. Everyone associates the cricket clicker with the 82nd on D-Day. 82nd historical societies sell the cricket online. Followers of the division hang framed crickets on their walls. Look, I know 82nd fans who have their crickets engraved with dates and places. Visitors to St. Mary-Église buy them as souvenirs. But there's some dispute about whether our paratroopers actually carried the cricket. Jim Gavin, in his book Airborne Operation, wrote the following, quote, "Sicily and Italy had taught us that it was undesirable to blacken our faces or use crickets as signals," end quote. So Gavin seems to imply that the 505th did not carry the cricket. Well, Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin Vandervoort, John Wayne's character in the movie, commanded 2nd Battalion of the 505th, so something may be up here. We know that the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment, the unit that Gavin commanded, used the challenge and password on D-Day. This does not mean that the paratroopers did not carry the cricket, but why would they if they were instructed to use the challenge and password? We have a copy of the packing list for the 505th for D-Day. The packing list is dated May 18th, 1944, and it is exhaustive. It's 2 pages long with entries such as notebook, matches or lighter in left chest pocket, toilet paper, 24 sheets in left chest pocket, spoon in right leg pocket. One thing you will not find in this incredibly detailed packing list, the cricket clicker. Look, I'm not saying that none of the paratroopers from the 82nd did not use the cricket. Clearly, some of them recall that they did. I'm just saying that the history is murky here. We know for certain that the 101st carried the cricket, but did all of the paratroopers from the 82nd? Well, here's Paul Woodage. He's a D-Day historian who lives and breathes the parachute assault in Normandy. He gives battlefield tours and studies the subject regularly. And he's pretty adamant about his point. I'm not saying he's right. I'm saying he's worth listening to.
So with the 82nd Airborne, you ask the average person on the street, what do they do in World War I? They won't have an idea. Ask them what they did in, the years between World War I and World War II, they have an idea. Sicily the same. You ask them about D-Day and Normandy, everybody's got an idea. Oh, yeah, they jumped in there, they did that. It's all based on the movies, it's based on this legend, or the news reports that come out, the anniversaries, and frankly, what I find is a lot of people who think they know about the Normandy invasion actually don't really know that much about it at all. They know the myths and legends. They know the things they picked up from movies and little news items around anniversary. And a very good example is the cricket. Now, the cricket was a little child's toy that you pressed it, click, click, and they were used by the 101st Airborne on D-Day as a means of identifying each other in the darkness. You had your conventional call signs of flash and thunder, but you also had a cricket, and you clicked it once, click, click, and if you heard click, 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 click from the other side of the hedgerow, that was a friendly soldier. Now, the 82nd Airborne did not have them. It is all documented. While they were the two divisions were in England, this idea of developing a means of identifying each other was come up with. And Matthew Vigil, I believe, is quoted as saying, "I'm not going to jump into Normandy with my a child's toy." And the 101st Airborne had them, and the 82nd didn't. You may have got the odd chap in the 82nd who got one off a friend in a pub or something, but they did not have them as a division. And yet, you can speak to a lot of veterans, and they'll say, "Yes, I had a cricket," and it's happened to me numerous times. I'd be interviewing an 82nd Airborne D-Day troop, and I would say, talk about equipment and what rifle he had, what shoot he had, and I'd say, and he'd say, "Oh yes, we have a crickets, of course." I said, "Ah, interesting. When were you issued your cricket?" "Oh, I can't remember." "How were you told how to use it?" "Oh, I don't remember." Who told you? Was it a battalion commander? Was it a company commander? "Oh, I can't remember that, Paul." And I'd say, "So where do you actually stow it? Did you have it in your pocket?" "I can't remember." And then I'd throw in the question, "Are you sure you had one, or do you just think you had one?" And they'd start, "Well, I'm not sure I did." And because that movie, The Longest Day, came out in 1962, and it's John Wayne there on screen telling how one click is responded by two clicks, you'd find wives would see these things in dime stores and buy one for their husband, veteran, and suddenly all these guys had them in their collections of memorabilia, even though they never actually had one at the time. And but I've had veterans swear to me they had a cricket, and you say, "Well, look, your division did not get them," and they go, "Well, how am I remembering that?" And that's, of course, where the whole idea of memory and collective memory and how things change over the years. But as far as we are aware, the 82nd Airborne did not have crickets, and yet the legend of the cricket is huge. So that's the story of the cricket.
So that's Paul Woodage. Just keep in mind, Cornelius Ryan, the guy who wrote about the 82nd issuing crickets in The Longest Day, did not actually cite his source in the book. I just want to give one more piece of evidence for context. The idea of using the cricket in combat is generally attributed to General Maxwell Taylor. Taylor was the chief of staff of the 82nd in 1942, and then went on to command the division artillery in Sicily and Italy. Prior to D-Day, Taylor moved on to the 101st to command the Screaming Eagles. Joe Burrell, a famous paratrooper with the 101st who passed away a while back, is, kind of like Paul Woodage, pretty adamant about his point. Here is a quote from Joe Burrell on this issue. Quote, "I know for a fact the 82nd Airborne was not issued crickets. They could have come into possession of them, but they weren't issued them. Regardless of what has been said, I know they weren't. The cricket was the brainstorm of General Taylor. I've talked to too many people about it and discussed it at reunions many times over the years." End quote. So we may never settle this issue, but it's worth considering if the 82nd being issued the cricket is fact or urban legend.
So we'll end this episode on the mystery of the clicker. Have thoughts or want to present your evidence on the clicker? Email the show at 82nd Airborne Division PAO@gmail.com. The All-American Legacy podcast is produced by the 82nd Airborne Division Public Affairs Section. Special thanks this and every week to Sergeant David Greason from the 49th Public Affairs Detachment and to Brian Bird from Fort Bragg Garrison's Multimedia Office. We want to thank Sergeant Anthony Hewitt for that opening segment. Special thanks also to the Pritzker Military Library and Museum for allowing us to use the audio from the Lieutenant Colonel James Megellas interviews. This episode was written using reference material from the Center for Military History, as well as the book Airborne by E.M. Flanagan Jr. and Chapter 9 of Guy Lafaro's book, The Sword of St. Michael. Thanks for listening to the All-American Legacy Podcast. Tell your friends, your family, and your fellow Americans to listen. Leave a review on iTunes. Reviews allow others to find the show. Tune in next week, Tuesday, 28 March, for Episode 12.